Hello and welcome back, and today we want to continue talking about Plex Media Server, and this time we want to talk about the DS1621xs Plus. What a mouthful. From now I might just call it the 1621. Now, we've done this kind of test several times before. As you know, if you've watched the other videos, you know what we've done is we've set up a camera here pointed at a laptop that's going to be going through a multitude of different multimedia files, and at the same time we're screen recording on another PC that is showing the performance of both the NAS in question, the 1621, and Plex Media Server's own resource monitor. At the same time, it's worth highlighting that this 6-bay I have populated with 10 TB drives, and these drives are in a RAID 6 environment. We aren't taking advantage of SSD caching, but I will be doing a caching video as well, just showing the performance with and without cache to see if it shows any difference whatsoever. On top of that, we can see that we've got those SSDs inside, but they are not being initialized. So, we're using exactly the same media as before. We're going to check the same files, 720p, 1080p, then we're going to go through different variants of 1080p and 4K across different codecs and compressions. We're going to be going through them all one by one. And the things you want to look at are here on the CPU bar here. You want to take advantage and look at the green bar, which is the Plex Media Server. The red one is the system itself. And down here on the memory, we've got the Plex Media Server in green and the system in purple on the right hand side of the screen there. On top of this, this is a Xeon-based NAS with 8 GB of DDR4 ECC memory, and that's a quad-core processor as well. And without further ado, let's get started. So the first file we're going to be going with, once again, just like we've done before, we're going to go with a nice straightforward 720p file. Now, this is a 720p H.264 file. It's the movie The Matrix from 1991. And again, I've done a completely clean install of Plex here that was installed little more than 25 minutes ago to make sure we've got almost no background. I've tested a couple of files before this, but that's really it. But as you can see on screen, none of the metadata has been scraped yet. There's none of the information about the files and that kind of thing. So let's have a quick look at this file being played. Let's click play. And again, this should prove absolutely no problem whatsoever. We're going to let the movie do its thing there on screen. We're going to make sure we don't have any sound, because if there's sound, we can end up getting the video pulled, because YouTube's AI is that aggressive. And you can see we've got the file there. It's playing in its original format there. We've got a tiny spike on the right hand side of the screen for you guys, where you can see the bandwidth there at the top, which shows the amount of data flowing through the network. And both the CPU and the memory have barely registered the playback of this file. So we can do some transcoding now. Let's transcode this file to a smaller variant. Let's knock it down to 480p. And that's been borderline instantaneous. And again, we're not really seeing the system be troubled in any way here. If we go even smaller, this is where things might present a problem. And a lot of the time, this is nothing to do with Plex Media Server. This is more to do with the system itself interacting with it. But as you can see, now we've lowered that file down to a depressing 160p, the system did have to work a little bit there, and that's unsurprising. As you can see, the picture quality you're seeing on screen here is absolutely terrible. Let's fast forward to later in the film. As you can see, the pixelation there is because we've lowered the resolution down to 160p. And the system's obviously requiring to work a little bit harder there, and there'll be the odd spike every time I've jumped forward in the movie. So if we revert that back to the original quality, let's go back down, play right the way back to the original, no transition speed there, absolutely straight through the mark, right the way back to original quality there on screen, and the system can just go back to normal. So that was a 720p file. Now we're going to go for a standard 1080p movie. We're going to head over to the same ones we've always gone for. We're going to go for Little Shop of Horrors there. And again, some of the metadata has already started being scraped, as you can see here. Some of the information from Rotten Tomatoes and Popcorn, and some of the cast listings as well. So let's go ahead and click play. And again, we'll get the progress bar at the bottom. And this is a 1080p HD file, and it's just at 1.9 megabits bitrate. And on top of that, it is an H.264 file. So for those that aren't aware, while I leave this file playing in the background a little bit, H.264 and H.265 are compression techniques. H.264, if we open up File Station here, it'll make a lot more sense. And we're going to skip that movie forward a little bit to another part in the film. I'm going to click play and skip it forward there, just to another random part of the film. H.264 is kind of an older, less compressive version of 4K and 1080p. As you can see here, later on in the video, we are going to be looking at all these different media types. If we list these by name, as you can see here, there's 3 megabits H.264, and then we've got all these different variants coming later in the video. And as you can see, each of the files grows in size because the picture quality does get higher as we go through from 1080p, gives way to 4K, but those different bit rates and codecs make all the difference. Case in point, we can look at two files that are exactly the same and look at H.265 and H.264, and you see that the H.264 is considerably bigger and 35 megabytes than the H.265, otherwise known as HEVC, at 10 megabyte. And again, you can go all the way through and you will see that logic continue moving forward. Look at the 100 megabit file at 356, and a lot more similar this time, but still rather large. But that logic still continues in the early stages. So let's head back into the movie and do some transcoding. Let's go right the way down to 480p. And again, this is a Xeon-based CPU, so one thing we do need to bear in mind with a lot of the actions that we're performing on today's NAS is this CPU is fantastically powerful. It is a very powerful CPU, and of course we will be doing the video station tests as well. But this very powerful CPU does have one major failing. It doesn't have embedded graphics, and its lack of embedded graphics will make all of the difference. That CPU is powerful, but because it doesn't have embedded graphics, it doesn't have a transcoding engine, which is what this system needs to convert files. If you like, we can make our way into the settings of this NAS, and as you'll see from the transcoder, we are running on Make My CPU Hurt, something you need a Plex pass in order to take advantage of. But that raw power that the CPU has and ability is what's pushing this transcoding through. So even though it doesn't have a transcoding engine, it does have raw power behind it. And if we break this down to the very, very smallest, we're going to see some intense pixelation. We're going to push the abilities of this CPU quite substantially. Because although this isn't a very hardcore file, the transcoding we're performing is actually quite dense. Something that is only going to get worse later on. So again, let's exit that file. We've seen that it's worked. And from here, we're going to make our way into the more intense files. These are the files where we are looking at H.265 and 10-bit media. So let's have these listed by list view. As you can see there by the name all the way from the top, we've got 3 megabit. And I don't know how clear that is on the screen recording here, but I'll try and annotate it as we go through. So just to kick things off, we're going to just do a 1080p 3 megabits per second H.264 file. We're just going to go ahead and play that immediately. And again, I do not anticipate any problems playing this file. And as you can see, it has played this file back instantaneously. There's been the tiniest of jumps in CPU there, very small indeed, but hardly anything to be concerned with. So now if we go for an H.265 version, same file, but H.265, and those that caught my Intel Celeron sort of 920, 720, etc. videos will know that this is where a lot of issues presented themselves. As you can see, it needed to convert that file because H.265 isn't native to Synology and a lot of their 10-bit media rates, and a lot of you have highlighted to me the fact that Synology has pulled 4K from a number of their spec pages we've seen recently. Just as an advertised feature, it's still very present, but that's something I'm personally investigating quite a lot. But as you can see, it has converted that file and played it back straight away. So now we're going to go up another rung. This is the 10-bit, and this is going to be 10-bit H.264. So again, H.264 files I'm not overly concerned with. I think it will play them pretty high. The highest H.264 I think we have is a 200 bit rate on that one. But as you can see, playing absolutely fine there. We're not even going to wait for it to finish because the caching bar has loaded. And I think this is where we're going to start to see a little bit of work. So first we're going to go for the H.265 version of 10-bit media. And straight away, as mentioned, it is going to need to convert that file straight away because it's not native. But the caching is moving pretty quick up here at the bottom. And we're getting some lovely clear media there on screen as well. No pixelation yet. I should highlight there should be a NAS Compare article detailing all of this below in the description. So do check that out if you want a lot of this information in a bigger screen size that you can zoom in on. And now we're going to go for 10 bit rate, so 10 megabits per second, H.265 10-bit, otherwise known as HDR. So let's play that file. And this is where, again, I think we're going to see a little bit of struggle. And again, I'm not going to say massive struggle, but it's just once you enter this region of multimedia, this is when you're entering quite high def territory. We are seeing the CPU and memory, or less memory, I should say. The CPU is working pretty hard there to convert this file. Even though this is a relatively small file, it has to be highlighted that these are all 30-second test files. So sometimes a file might play back faster than the system can convert it. But this has been an absolute success here. So let's go back to the previous list. Now we're moving into the 30 megabits per second. So again, 30 megabits per second H.264. We're just selecting that just for the sake of playing it. Leave that there. And again, absolutely fine, but we're still noticing those spikes earlier on the timeline from when we were testing the H.265 variants. And again, we're not going to let that finish, no need. We're going to go to 30 megabits per second H.265 now. After that is going to be the HDR. So again, the system is going to work a little harder there in the background once again. We'll get the bar up there. As you can see, it needs to convert the file to make it into a playable variant. We've seen the spike there of the CPU, and the file is playing, and the buffering is still staying a good 10 seconds ahead of the actual playback of the file, which is lovely to see. And again, now we're going to go for the 100 megabits per second 1080p H.264. So now we're into triple figures in terms of that megabits per second through. The file's thinking a little bit, and it's playing the original file as well, which is great to see. CPU, tiniest little bump there on the road. I do think we're absolutely fine there. So let's go back. And again, I know this is repetitious, guys, but it's good to cover all the bases. And now we're going to go for the H.265 version. And remember, this is 100 megabits per second. After this, we are going to be moving into 4K for Plex Media Server. And we are seeing the buffering at the bottom of the screen. We're up to about 10 seconds. Oh no, close enough. We're at 9. And the file is playing. No pixelation there as well. So great stuff. We are utilizing a lot of raw CPU power, as you can see there on screen. But that is to be expected from a CPU that doesn't have a transcoding engine. So now we're into the 4K files, and we have 4 different versions to go through. First, it's going to be 120 megabits per second H.264 4K UHD. So again, now we're in some heavy hitting territory here. This is where normally, this is where normally I would recommend utilizing an Intel Core based processor for the most part, because as you can see, the buffering is now starting to slow down a little bit. We're up to 5 or 6 seconds of buffering. Sorry, I kicked the tripod there. Quite a closed environment I'm working in here. But this is where we're starting to see a little bit of trouble. So what we need to do now is move into transcoding territory. One of the more negative signs is when you see that the CPU didn't spike. When the CPU doesn't spike, generally that means that it is hitting a wall. So for now, we're going to try that file again, but this time we're going to try and transcode this file. It's going to move it into a smaller version, so we're going to ask it to convert automatically. And we're going to see how the system deals with this. 4K on Plex Media Server, particularly with transcoding, is a tricky beast, it has to be said. And I do think we are hitting a bit of a wall with the 4K on here. It is going to try, and we are seeing buffering, but I do think that buffering is not going to outweigh the playback. We're going to give it a little bit of a head up, give it a little bit of caching there, let it get to about 10 seconds and play it. But even then, I do not think this is going to help. And even the very fact that we need to do this, and the fact that the caching is already hitting a wall, shows us that we are not really hitting a success with this test. So we're going to have to scratch that one off. And the CPU, as you can see, is at max. We have maxed out that CPU for all it can do here. And it's playing it, but it's highly unlikely that this playback is going to outperform the caching. We're still at 12 seconds, and it's just going to shut down because it couldn't outpace the caching of the NAS there in the background. So we're going to come out of that there. It's going to keep trying to play it, and it will. But again, I would not call this test a success. We'll come out of there. Next, we'll go for the H.265 version of that same file, and this is a 10-bit H.265 4K UHD 120 megabits per second file. And I do think, once again, this is going to be a bit of a loss. It will try, it will certainly try. But in this scenario, we may have to look into tweaking the Plex Media Server performance. We've done some videos recently about changing the driver set that's utilized by Plex, but I will highlight that this is a very different beast to that of the Celeron we saw before. As you can see, it is playing the file. I don't think it's going to outpace that caching at quite a high enough rate, but it has seemingly played back this 120 file, but as you see, it can't outpace the cache. So it has managed to play it, and perhaps this is an area where offline transcoding would be good, but it has had to transcode that file as it is HDR, or in other words 10-bit H.265. So now we're going to look at 200 megabits per second, and that's 4K UHD H.264. And if it struggled with the previous one, it'll be interesting to see if it's managed to play this file. Because this file, although it's quite large, this is still technically a more reasonable bit rate to playback. You do notice this a lot of the time when you see some of the middling ones, and particularly when you see them coming out of things like HDR. But once again, we are hitting a wall there on that file. So we may have to give up on this one. In a bit, I'm going to try and do some multiplayer tests in just a moment. But as we see, the 200 has kind of hit a wall, and just to knock it out, let's try the 400 megabits per second H.265 HDR UHD 4K file. This is a beast. It will automatically go into conversion. And this is a file that when we tried to play it on a 920 and a 720, it did nothing. It was a brick. And although it is trying to play this file, and we're seeing caching there, fair play to it, it's trying to cache. I do think it will play it, but it won't. The playback won't, will obviously outpace the cache. It's nice that it's trying, but this is a file that has defeated many, many NASes. As you see, it has done it again today. So, next thing I'm going to do is try and do some simultaneous files. So what we're going to do is duplicate that page, and we're going to play a few files from the same directory at the same time. So we saw the 10-bit H.264 do okay, so let's play that file, and we can do the same thing with H.265 on the two different systems. So we're going to play those two files, and we're going to see how the system copes with that. So the 10-bit, the HDR version, there's the other one playing there. But the HDR version took a little bit longer because it needed to convert. but we're still able to transcode these quite large files side by side. And again, that's 10 megabits per second H.264 on the right and H.265 there, flicking between the two screens. But seemingly it was able to play back those files. So let's exit those, go into another file there. And this time we're going to go with looking at the 30 megabits per second file. So we're going to go for H.264 playing there and H.265 playing there. And we're going to have a look at the performance of both of these files doing their thing. As you see, that's playing there. The H.264 is playing in original quality, and the H.265 is playing presumably in transcoded quality. The CPU is being maxed out because Plex Media Server is utilizing all of those resources that are inside, but ultimately I think this is still one of the best Synology NASs out there for Plex performance. You have to bear in mind that the file types we've been looking at are exceptionally high end. These are ones where I wouldn't recommend Plex anyway. I would talk about using an HDMI NAS with a very low latency playback, and that's what I'm talking about, the 1 and the 200 megabits per second and above. But this has been our Plex Media Server test on the brand new DS1621xs Plus. You can find out lots more information about this NAS in the description. And otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Click like if you did, click subscribe to learn more, and I will be doing more tests on this NAS soon. I will see you next time.